Little is spoken of the role that relapse plays in overall progression on the semen retention journey. Much has been discussed regarding the negative side effects and symptoms that often follow a relapse, such as low energy, depression, anxiety, brain fog, and a host of other physical symptoms, to name a few. These symptoms are typically attributed to the physical loss of the vital fluid, but this is only one part of the mechanism at work. Oftentimes, people feel down and depleted for several days after relapsing from a long streak. This can often be attributed to the disappointment and mental exhaustion that comes from losing their streak and having to turn their counter back to zero. It is a mental fatigue that we all feel after a perceived failure in life. It is worth noting that perceiving it as a failure can greatly exacerbate symptoms, and so the sooner a person is able to understand the necessary role that relapse plays in the bigger picture, the sooner they will stop self-sabotaging in this manner. This means that their progress on the subsequent streak can resume almost immediately. This brief exhaustion is not to be confused with the debilitating physical fatigue that occurs when a person completely reverts to the old pleasure cycle. Continuous releases in close succession will create a very real physical fatigue and should be avoided if possible. A single release puts a minor dent in your progress. It pushes the pause button for a few days. And even though you may put your counter back to zero, your progress is certainly not back on zero. After all the miles you have put in, it would take a significant relapse window to set you all the way back to the start line. And in fact, once you have taken your first steps on the semen retention journey, you can never truly go back to zero. Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, "A mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions." The insights you gain on these several-month streaks stay with you, in the background, dormant, until you are ready to push on again. Of course, as far as numbers go, you can restart your counter. But as far as energy goes, you are still levels above your old self. This is why the counter is a good tool for tracking individual streaks, but is not a measuring stick for the entire spiritual process. With time, you will notice that a single release has only a slight effect on the way you feel and the way that others react to you. The perceived change in other people's behavior has much more to do with the way you alter your own energy via self-sabotage after a release. You must learn not to do this. Continue the journey as you were. Treat this release as a clean slate. One streak has come to an end. You have made physical, mental, and spiritual changes that cannot be undone. Take a day to reflect and re-energize. Get some exercise, take a cold shower, eat some clean food, and prepare to begin your next push to the higher planes. Ojas is the non-physical energy source that powers everything about you. Every time you embark on a meaningful semen retention streak, your body slowly begins to fill with this essence. This is the life force responsible for the high energy and profound insights that begin to emerge after a relatively short time retaining your seed. This is not to be confused with the physical mechanism of the testes filling up with seed. Rather, having a full tank of mature sperm in the testes is the driving force that allows the ojas to finally begin traveling upwards and filling the other cells in the body. A process that has not occurred in most males of this generation. However, it is not the physical semen itself that is giving you this new life and this new mind, which is why the occasional release, when spaced appropriately, is not overly detrimental to the ojas store. However, completely emptying the testes will cause the internal factory to fire back up and go back into manufacturing mode. The testes are now frantically grabbing nutrients from wherever they can be found in the body. Organs, bone marrow, fat, and the bloodstream. And as a result, the flow of ojas is put on hold. No more ojas will be sent upwards to nourish the body until the testes are able to return to a calm state once more. This does not mean you lose what you have already cultivated. It is simply a pause in the process. When the stocks have been replenished, upward nourishment of the body can be resumed. It is true that upon releasing, fluid is taken from the testes on a physical level. But for a long-term practitioner of semen retention, the ojas, the essence of the semen, has been traveling upwards into the body for weeks and months during the retention phase. And this is not undone by one simple emptying of the testes. However, if you are draining yourself on a daily basis, eventually the body's cells will have no choice but to give up the precious life force. As the testes, the sperm factories, are now working at redline to manufacture more semen and keep up with the demand. The semen retention journey can be likened to climbing an enormous mountain. The average human, or any human for that matter, cannot simply climb to the peak of Everest in a single ascent. A person must climb and gain altitude to a certain level, remain there for a short time until the body begins to acclimatize, and then return back down to a lower altitude to recover before they can ascend again. On the second ascent, due to the stimulated changes in the body, they can now push on to higher heights. They are essentially starting from a new and much higher launch pad. This new start point is inaccessible to someone who has not undergone the initial acclimatization. This process is repeated several times until the body gets the message and adapts to the extent that it is ready to push to the top. This would not be possible without descending to base camp to recover after each adaptation. The question is, to what extent is this comparable to the semen retention journey? For most men, the testes have spent a lifetime in a frantic manufacturing mode, churning out copious amounts of high-potency fluid in response to human self-stimulus. The testes are a gland, and unlike organs, they alter their behavior based on a stimulus. The artificial overstimulation of these glands has caused a strong pattern of fluid overproduction. This pattern is not something that can be corrected overnight. After many years working at maximum RPM, it can take months and even years of conscious retention efforts to reverse that programming. It may take a minimum of 90 days until the message gets across that production can slow down and the glands can relax, possibly for the first time in decades. This is what frees up that excess energy to be used elsewhere in the body. The organism can finally get to work on all those other areas that have been abandoned for a lifetime. Trying to reverse this deeply ingrained overproduction in one single retention streak is like trying to reach the top of the mountain in one push with no acclimatization periods. It is simply not possible. This is why it is important not to be disheartened when a release does occur. Know that it is part of the process and continue on as you were, knowing that acclimatization has begun. These fluid releases in between streaks are akin to temporarily descending the mountain to rest and readjust. Going down temporarily does not mean the acclimatization has gone. Similarly, just because you release the pressure valve from the testes once, it does not mean you have lost your overall upward progress. It is true that if you remained at low altitude for long enough, you would start to reverse the changes you had made on the higher planes. However, you would need many releases sustained over time to undo any physical, mental, and spiritual acclimatizations. This would be akin to spending weeks or months at the bottom of the mountain. This process of ascending and descending takes time. It cannot be cheated. Acclimatizing to a full body of Ojas, after spending so many years in the depleted state, will not happen in one cycle. It can take years, and this is why the relapses are necessary in the overall transformation of the organism. Every time you return to a safe altitude to recover, you are a slightly different being to who you were when you started. Each streak is a climb to the unknown, a little push to an uncomfortable place, so the body knows it is now time to transform. As these little pushes add up, the body eventually reaches a state where it no longer needs to come back down to a lower camp to recover. You no longer need to release the pressure. Your body has now adapted to this new realm, and you can stay there indefinitely if you wish. The message to take away here is that the releases are not a mistake. They are a necessary hike back down the mountain in preparation for significant upcoming growth. No one can tell you how many descents your body will require before you can ascend fully. This is a personal journey, and the route will vary widely between individuals. One must remember that this process should not be used as a loophole that allows you to release whenever you wish. You will know internally when the time is right, as opposed to when you are looking for a quick dopamine hit. One slip-up is not so damaging. It is the mindset that follows that is most damaging. It is very easy to convince yourself to now go on an extended run of releases in order to get them all out of the way. This almost always leads to a several-month-long mind battle, with release after release, until finally you find the motivation to once again push yourself back up to those discrete levels. One can gradually increase the length of each retention cycle until the thought of releasing no longer enters the mind. As you fill with Ojas, you slowly transform into a new state of being, one that has no need to release at all. This new constant baseline feeling is significantly greater than the temporary high experienced by releasing, but it is almost impossible to imagine this feeling until you get there. This is why the first few months have to be based on belief, until a higher energy takes over and the results become undeniable. There is a high energetic hump to get over first, which is extremely challenging. But without this energetic hump, anyone would be able to get to that place. You must understand that this is a long and cyclic process, a pulsating system of retention followed by quick release. Retain, release, retain, release. You must not allow your mindset to change after a release. Think of it like a pump that is pumping fluid into a system. Every retention cycle is one contraction, one rep that is adding to the total store of Ojas. When the pump contracts, this is the retention phase. It then must relax temporarily and return to its original dimensions in order to contract again. All of these contractions are allowing more and more Ojas into the system. Keep in mind that you cannot rush this process. Let it unfold naturally. Let the cycles do their job and do not fear the necessary release. Finally, it must be emphasized that setting the counter back to zero does not mean that your energy store goes back to zero. Use the counter to help you push a little further each time. Do not use it as an indicator of overall progress. Let it operate in the background. But pay more attention to how you feel inside and how other people react to the energetic change within and around you. Always remember, there are many paths up the same mountain. There will be no doubt in your mind when the shift occurs.